and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry with Camilla. They were furious. And not only that, Kate and William were angry too. And that anger, of course, Harry was angry, that anger went right through that small part of the congregation.
Nobody inside the room expected Catherine to reach into the folder beside her. Camilla certainly did not expect what came next. With Charles, William, Anne, Sophie, Edward, and senior members of the royal firm gathered around the table, the princess produced a private letter bearing the Queen's own words. Then Catherine began reading. Within seconds, a tense family discussion became something far more dangerous, a public reckoning inside the monarchy itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine had entered the emergency gathering prepared for another difficult argument about her growing role beside William. The royal firm, an informal term for the senior working royals, and the institution around them, had been called together after weeks of tension over preparations connected to the future king's eventual reign. Camilla believed the discussion would focus on protocol, access, and visibility. She did not know that a copy of her private correspondence had reached the princess. The room changed the moment Catherine unfolded the letter. She explained that it was a private message Camilla had sent to Charles, then began reading aloud. The wording was unmistakable. The Queen had urged the king to restrict Catherine's access to future reign briefings, private discussions, preparing William and his household for responsibilities that would come with a later reign, and warned that allowing the princess to take on too much could make Camilla appear increasingly irrelevant. Camilla recognized the opening sentence immediately. She interrupted, insisting the letter had been private, but Catherine did not raise her voice. She kept reading until the most damaging passage had been heard. Across the table, William remained silent. His hands stayed folded, but his restraint said more than anger ever could. He watched his wife expose an attempt to limit her place in the future monarchy, and everyone understood that the prince was choosing silence only because speaking too soon might make the confrontation explode. Anne broke that silence first. The Princess Royal turned to Charles and asked whether he knew the letter existed and whether he had ever intended to act on it. The king hesitated. It was only a moment, but Sophie noticed it, Edward noticed it, and Catherine certainly noticed it. The pause made the question more dangerous than any answer. Catherine then revealed that bringing the letter into the room had not been her first choice. She had remained silent until something happened only days earlier that convinced her the pressure would continue if she said nothing. The letter had stunned the room, but its words were only the surface. Beneath them lay years of insecurity, rivalry, and a growing fear that Catherine was becoming the woman the monarchy could no longer imagine without. This was never simply about duties on a calendar. For Catherine and Camilla, the argument touched something far more personal: legitimacy, belonging, and the brutal knowledge that royal relevance has an expiration date. One woman had spent decades fighting to be accepted beside the king. The other was gradually becoming the face of what came after him. And inside a family built upon succession, the future possesses a power that even the present cannot permanently restrain. Camilla understood that danger better than anyone. She remembered how long public acceptance had taken and how carefully her position beside Charles had been built after years of hostility. The queen consort, the title used for the wife of a reigning king, without giving her his sovereign powers, had finally reached a place of stability. But Catherine occupied a different path. As William accepted more responsibility, his wife naturally moved closer to the center of the monarchy's future, and every new duty made that future feel less distant. Camilla admitted the fear privately to Charles before the crisis erupted. She told him that Catherine's growing presence was beginning to create the impression that the palace had emotionally moved beyond his reign before it was finished. The king tried to calm her, reminding her that preparation for William's eventual responsibilities did not diminish the present. But she heard something colder in the argument. Preparation might be practical. Visibility was emotional. And the more the younger couple appeared ready, the more she feared becoming symbolic of a chapter already closing. Catherine sensed the resistance before she understood where it came from. One future reign briefing was suddenly cancelled. Then another appearance was reassigned with little explanation. She turned to William after the latest change and asked whether she had unknowingly crossed a boundary. The prince lowered the papers in his hand and told his wife she had done exactly what had been requested. Catherine held his gaze for a moment before answering quietly. Then someone clearly disagrees. Sophie eventually gave that instinct a shape. The Duchess of Edinburgh, a senior working royal who supports the monarch through official engagements, privately warned Catherine that several small disruptions seemed connected. Altered briefings, reduced access, and duties moved elsewhere. The trusted confidant would not accuse anyone without proof, but she urged the princess to pay attention to the pattern rather than each incident alone. Anne had noticed it too. The Princess Royal told Catherine she would not interfere on instinct alone, because once family suspicion became accusation, there would be no easy way back. Still, her refusal to dismiss the pattern mattered. Then proof arrived. Not gossip, not speculation, something written. And when Catherine traced it back, everything led toward one ceremony, where a seemingly minor royal decision had become the point of no return. The confrontation did not begin with the letter. It began 3 weeks earlier at Windsor, during an evening that should have demonstrated royal unity. Catherine arrived expecting to carry out a role already approved by William and the King's office. Instead, moments before the doors opened, she was informed that her place had changed. No explanation was offered. No argument was permitted. But what appeared to be a small adjustment would later become the precise moment everyone identified as the beginning of the rupture. Catherine had been scheduled to stand beside William during a restricted diplomatic reception at Windsor. The reception, a smaller gathering held before the main dinner, so senior royals can personally greet important guests, was meant to include Charles, Camilla, the prince, and his wife together. Her presence had already been agreed because William increasingly wanted Catherine beside him, while they prepared for responsibilities that would eventually become theirs. That was why the sudden change felt different. It was not merely a seating adjustment, it touched the future itself. Minutes before the reception began, Catherine was quietly informed that Camilla had personally instructed staff to remove her from the receiving group and replace her with another senior royal. The Queen's reasoning was blunt. Only those acting directly for the current sovereign should stand beside Charles. Catherine did not argue. She thanked the aide, stepped back, and completed every remaining duty expected of her. But the restraint came at a cost. Those closest to her noticed that the warmth had disappeared from her voice. William discovered the change after the event. The prince went directly to Charles and asked why his wife had been removed from a role already approved. The king's answer came quickly. He had issued no such instruction. That single denial changed the entire meaning of what had happened. If the monarch had not ordered it, then someone else had exercised influence in his name. Later that night, Catherine crossed paths with Camilla and asked whether there had been a problem with her attendance. The Queen did not apologize. She simply answered that sometimes future roles must wait for the future. Catherine said nothing more, but the sentence stayed with her long after the evening ended. Days later, an administrative copy of Camilla's private letter to Charles reached William's office during a review of correspondence concerning future household arrangements. Catherine read the document alone. When she reached the paragraph describing her growing prominence as a threat to the balance of the current reign, she stopped, read it again, and closed the folder. For several days, Catherine chose silence. Then Camilla made one final move, and that decision transformed private hurt into a confrontation neither woman could retreat from. The letter had barely left Catherine's hands when Camilla pushed back her chair. For the first time, there were no careful smiles and no ceremonial distance protecting either woman. The Queen demanded to know how private correspondence had been obtained. Catherine refused to be dragged away from the substance of what she had just exposed. Around them sat the people closest to the crown, watching two women stop speaking through protocol and finally speak directly to each other. Charles tried to bring the room back under control, but Anne stopped him before the argument could be reduced to a private family quarrel. The Princess Royal reminded the king that the letter had invoked royal authority, meaning the influence attached to the sovereign, and the machinery acting in his name, to alter Catherine's responsibilities. That made the issue larger than hurt feelings. William understood it too. He remained silent for only a few seconds longer, watching his wife face the woman who had tried to restrict her without ever speaking to either of them directly. Camilla turned fully toward Catherine, and said she had no right to expose a private communication before the family. The princess did not flinch. She answered that the letter stopped being merely private the moment it sought to change her official responsibilities. If decisions about her future role were being discussed behind closed doors, she said, then neither she nor William could be expected to pretend those conversations were harmless. Camilla's anger sharpened. She insisted she had been trying to protect Charles from appearing prematurely overshadowed by the next generation. Catherine answered with the same controlled tone that had unsettled the room from the beginning. Protecting the king, she said, did not require diminishing the people who would eventually carry the institution forward. The words landed hard because they turned Camilla's defense back on itself. William finally spoke. The prince revealed that several future reign planning meetings had been quietly questioned after the letter was sent, and that staff had begun asking whether Catherine's attendance should be reduced. Future reign planning referred to the private preparation surrounding the responsibilities William and his household would inherit later. He made clear that what began as one private concern had already started shaping real decisions. Charles could no longer remain vague. The king admitted that Camilla had discussed her concerns with him, but he insisted he had never approved any campaign to push Catherine aside. The queen looked toward him and immediately understood the distinction he was drawing. He had listened to her privately. He was not prepared to defend everything that followed publicly. That realization changed the room again. Everyone now looked toward Charles, but even the monarch could not settle what came next alone. Part of the authority Camilla had challenged belonged not to the current reign, but to the future William was already being prepared to carry. For all the emotion inside the room, the next decision came down to a cold distinction the monarchy could not ignore. Charles was sovereign. William was heir. Camilla stood beside the current king, while Catherine stood beside the man who would someday replace him. Those positions overlapped, but they were not identical. And as advisors quietly clarified the boundary, the queen began to understand that influence gained through marriage had limits when it reached into another household's future. Charles listened without interrupting as the distinction was explained. The sovereign controls the current royal household, the structure of staff, duties, appearances, and responsibilities carried out directly in the monarch's name. William, however, retains substantial authority over the Prince of Wales' household, meaning the team and planning built around his present role as heir and the responsibilities he and Catherine will one day inherit. The king removed his glasses, set his pen down, and looked first at his wife, then at his son. Camilla refused to accept that the boundary could be drawn so cleanly. She argued that anything affecting the monarchy's public image ultimately affected Charles, and therefore, the present could not simply be separated from the future. The queen insisted that her concerns had always been about protecting the sovereign from appearing diminished while still on the throne. But William heard something else beneath the argument. To him, advice had turned into interference the moment Catherine's access to his own planning had been questioned. William answered carefully. The prince said Camilla had every right to express concern, and Charles had every right to listen. But the future king made one point impossible to misunderstand. Decisions about how he prepared alongside Catherine could not be quietly rewritten because another member of the family felt threatened by their growing visibility. Advice was legitimate. Control was not. Charles finally ended the uncertainty. The king stated that no future household briefing involving William and Catherine would be altered because of Camilla's letter. Anne supported the decision immediately. The Princess Royal said protecting the crown did not mean allowing one generation to reach into the next. and quietly shape responsibilities that would eventually belong to someone else. Sophie said little, but she noticed the change in Camilla before anyone acknowledged it. The trusted confidant watched the Queen absorb what had really happened. This was no longer about one reception, one briefing, or one letter. An informal influence she believed she possessed had just been limited in front of the family. Nothing had been announced beyond palace walls. Yet by the following morning, Camilla would see that judgment written into something far more tangible than words. There was no dramatic proclamation. No one stripped Camilla of her title, and no formal punishment was announced. That was what made the morning so brutal. The consequences appeared quietly in appointments removed, briefings separated, and doors that no longer automatically opened. Sitting with a revised schedule in front of her, the Queen understood that the previous night had not destroyed her position beside Charles. It had done something more precise. It had established exactly where that position stopped. Camilla received the revised schedule over breakfast and noticed the change almost immediately. A future household coordination meeting had disappeared. That meeting concerned planning, tied specifically to William and Catherine's eventual responsibilities, rather than duties carried out for the current sovereign. The distinction was technical on paper, but emotionally, it was unmistakable. She remained fully involved in work beside Charles. Her title had not been touched. Her public standing remained intact. Yet one door that had previously felt open was now clearly closed. Camilla reread the page, placed it beside her untouched tea, and said nothing. Charles entered soon afterward, and understood from her expression that she had already seen the change. The Queen asked him whether he was protecting the monarchy or simply protecting Catherine from her. The king did not answer quickly. Then he told her he was protecting both his own reign and William's right to shape what came after it. His words were calm, but they made the boundary feel permanent. Camilla felt the loss more sharply when she learned that William had instructed his team to direct every question concerning Catherine's future role through the Prince of Wales' office. That office, the staff structure supporting the heir and his immediate responsibilities, would now control access to planning around the next reign. The message was impossible to misunderstand. Advice could still be offered. Influence could no longer be assumed. Catherine, however, felt no triumph. Sophie found her unsettled by how far the confrontation had gone. The trusted confidant listened as the princess admitted that reading the letter aloud had been necessary. But she still wondered whether exposing Camilla in front of the family had caused more humiliation than the situation required. Winning the boundary had not erased the discomfort of how it had been won. Catherine carried that doubt to William. The prince heard her say she did not want victory at the cost of permanently dividing the family. He answered that a boundary was not revenge if it should have existed already. The institutional battle was finished. The personal one was not. And Catherine knew the next conversation could not happen through Charles, William, Sophie, or anyone else. It had to happen with Camilla, alone. When Catherine entered the room, there were no aides waiting behind either woman. No secretaries, no family members, and no constitutional language to hide behind. Camilla had asked for the meeting privately, and Catherine had accepted for one reason. The letter might have settled the question of authority, but it had never answered the question of fear. For several uncomfortable seconds neither spoke. Then the Queen looked at the woman she had tried to restrain, and admitted what no formal meeting had allowed her to say. Catherine brought the original letter, but left every briefing note behind. That choice mattered, because a briefing note is simply a written summary used to guide official discussions, and this conversation was no longer about procedure. Charles was absent. William was absent. No palace official could translate emotion into safer language. The princess placed the letter between them and waited. Camilla looked at it, then admitted that the monarchy had begun to feel as though it was emotionally moving toward the younger couple faster than she had been prepared to accept. Camilla spoke without the defensive edge Catherine had heard before. The Queen said she had spent years fighting for acceptance beside Charles, enduring hostility, before finally finding a place that felt secure. Watching William and his wife receive warmth so naturally had awakened something old in her. She feared that people had accepted her only temporarily, while they were already waiting for the future couple, with an affection she had never experienced so easily. Catherine listened, but she did not surrender the boundary they had just fought to establish. She pushed the letter slightly forward and told Camilla she had never wanted her place. The princess said she only refused to have her own position reduced so someone else could feel safer. For the first time, the argument stopped being about who mattered more. It became about whether one woman's insecurity could justify limiting another woman's future. Camilla finally admitted the Windsor intervention had been hers. She also acknowledged that the letter to Charles had been an attempt to regain control once she sensed her informal influence slipping away. Catherine answered with her own difficult admission. Reading the correspondence before the family had been deliberately forceful because quiet objections had repeatedly changed nothing. She knew it had humiliated the Queen. She had chosen that risk. Neither woman apologized for occupying her place in the monarchy. But Camilla apologized for trying to control Catherine's, while the princess acknowledged the pain caused by exposing the letter so publicly. Inside the palace, the temperature finally dropped. Outside it, the explosion was only beginning, because details of the extraordinary confrontation had already escaped the room. By sunrise, the argument was no longer confined to royal walls. The letter had become the story Britain could not stop discussing. Commentators debated Catherine's decision to expose it. Defenders of Camilla called the move humiliating, and supporters of the princess argued that silence would have rewarded interference. Yet one image captured the crisis more powerfully than any debate. Two royal generations arriving separately for duty, while the country wondered whether a private family rupture had permanently redrawn the monarchy. Catherine saw the scale of the reaction almost immediately. News of the royal firm confrontation had spread through detailed accounts of the letter, the reading, and the stunned silence that followed. The royal firm, the informal name often used for senior working royals, and the institution surrounding them, was suddenly being discussed, as if it had split into opposing camps. Some believed the princess had defended herself after quiet pressure failed. Others argued that exposing private correspondence before the family had crossed a line that could never be fully repaired. A fictional morning newspaper captured the mood with brutal simplicity. Its front page carried opposing photographs of Catherine and Camilla beneath the enormous headline, "The Letter That Split the Palace." Below it ran the words, "Future Queen challenges Queen over secret intervention." Near Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered as television crews broadcast live. Some held signs supporting the younger royal. Others insisted the Queen consort had been publicly humiliated. What had begun as a dispute over access and future duties had become a national argument about loyalty, power, and humiliation. Catherine watched only part of the coverage before switching off the television. William asked whether she regretted reading the letter aloud. The prince heard her answer without hesitation. She regretted that it had ever become necessary. Her husband understood the distinction. She was not celebrating the damage. She was refusing to pretend the pressure had not existed. Camilla saw the same headline. The Queen did not lash out. She folded the newspaper carefully and asked an aide to remove the remaining copies from her sitting room. The quietness of the reaction carried more sadness than fury. She knew the private fear she had finally admitted to Catherine was now being reduced to a public battle she could no longer control. Charles refused demands that either woman be publicly condemned. The king instead authorized a carefully worded clarification stating that present and future royal households carried distinct responsibilities. Anne reinforced that message by appearing beside both women at the next family engagement, making clear that the monarchy would not become a permanent factional war. The country had chosen sides. The crown could not. Before the family could move forward, Charles still had to decide what lesson would survive after the headlines disappeared. In the end, nobody lost a crown, nobody was banished from the family, and no dramatic palace exile followed. The consequence was subtler and far more lasting. Camilla remained beside Charles as queen. Catherine remained beside William, as the woman destined to share his future reign. But after one private letter became the most painful subject in the royal firm, every person around that table understood a boundary that could never again be ignored. The present could guide the future, but it could not possess it. Charles made that boundary clear after the public storm had begun to settle. The king formalized a distinction between matters belonging to his current sovereign household and preparations managed by William for the reign that would eventually follow. The sovereign household, the staff, duties, and decisions serving the reigning monarch remained entirely under Charles's authority. Future household planning, however, would stay with the prince and Catherine. Camilla kept her full place beside her husband, but she no longer tried to shape the younger woman's participation in those preparations. The first senior family meeting after the crisis tested whether that settlement would survive contact with real emotion. Catherine took her usual seat beside William. Camilla entered, paused for only a moment, then sat beside Charles without objection. No chair was moved. No challenge followed. The silence carried its own message. The queen had not been removed. The princess had not been elevated above her. Each woman simply occupied the position that already belonged to her. Catherine did not experience that moment as victory. She knew exposing the letter had protected her future responsibilities, but she also understood that it had exposed another woman's deepest insecurity in front of the family. Camilla, in turn, had learned that respect could not be secured by reducing whoever came next. Her position beside Charles became more stable only when she stopped treating Catherine's rise as proof of her own decline. William gave the clearest verdict afterward. The prince told his wife that she had protected something larger than herself, the principle that their future household must be shaped by those who would someday carry its responsibility. Charles faced a harder conclusion. By avoiding a difficult boundary with Camilla earlier, the king had allowed private fear to become a family crisis. Anne understood the lesson before anyone else. The Princess Royal had insisted from the beginning that continuity depended not on one generation defeating another, but on each generation knowing where its authority ended. That became the final meaning of the letter. Catherine did not conquer Camilla. The queen was not pushed aside. Charles kept his family, William kept control of his future, and the monarchy survived because the truth finally forced everyone to accept the boundary they had spent too long avoiding. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.